Among the Obelisks by Edmund Siderius. It was on the 6th moon of the 12th cycle of the rule of Pharaoh Akenbet-neferu that her most trusted Chatsi, Rasui, was condemned. It followed the way of the fall of the favorite. Blasphemy was to be the charge of most convenience, exile from Kamet, the punishment. The children freshly shaven, huddling in animal skins against the morning snow, jeered at him in the marketplace. Anixabe, who had been his mentor at the Temple of Life and taught him, through kindness and a kind of cruelty, the sacred glyphs, shook his head sadly as he walked by, but with a smile in his weary eyes. His name, not deeply carved into the monuments of deeds, was cut out, his eyes scorned from the stone, his ears deafened by the blows of countless chisels. He was no longer a Chatti, no longer the man called Rasui. Unable to abide separation from the black lands of his birth, he conspired to avoid exile abroad in favor of one more obscuring and secure. Where else in the world was there but Kamet? To the west the endless ocean, to the south the Nubians, ever threatening, and beyond them the many puzzling nations of the Algonquins. To the east were the great mountain ranges where the living may not pass. There rested the Valley of the Kings, where Akenbet-neferu's ancestors were interred to await godhood among the stars. The ice at the crown of the valley never faded from its unnatural blue. It only deepened to an almost black when Anubis had come to take the pharaoh home. In his many machinations, Rasui found himself among thieves and the impure robbers of the dead. Through the common treachery of thief to thief, it was revealed that Rasui had disregarded the decree of the pharaoh. From then on he was christened Kamenwati, the dark rebel, and lived his days like an animal in the frozen deserts of the northern reaches. His Ba following his name became anathema to the order of Ma'at, the balance of all things. Only then was he truly reviled, he who burnt the village of Therunwatu in a rage, held men down in the waters of Giado eels if they defied his desires, and robbed the bodies of the dead for his own gain. His name was likened unto offal in the stench of serpents in the bay. His rampage only ceased on the 9th moon of the 35th year of Akenbet-neferu's rule, when Kamenwati was captured by the palace guard. He was called upon by the royal inquisitors to appease the order of Ma'at for his many violations and obscenities. Since he was a robber of the dead, the criminal was charged with the duty of the slitter, the necessary offender of the funerary tent. Wolfish Inpu would preside over the ceremonies, and like the wolves that prowled the icy borders of the Black Lands, his attendants would be Kamenwati's fellow felons, those who had almost fallen off from the human world. And this he agreed to do. On the 3rd moon of the 37th year of Akenbet-neferu's rule, she decided to pass from this world, to be renewed on the bark of Kepher, the starfish god who begat himself from himself. It was shortly before the coming of the long night, when the priests would gather in the temple of Ra to spit upon, trample, and cast imprecations on the name of Apophis, the serpent of chaos. Apophis, the serpent who menaced Ra on his long subterranean journey through the Duat, on his quest to kiss the land with lips of the morning sun after the subdual of darkness indefinite. With this long turning of the solar disk, he would bring the dead queen with him through the lands of death, the Duat, Amenta. Temeri was setting with him, his Temeri, who took the man's name Akenbet-neferu upon her ascendancy. Temeri whom he would never join in the feasts and revels of the afterworld, with whom he longed to still despite his long exile. But the feather of Ma'at fell heavily upon his heart. On the scales his heart would upset the balance of the feather of Ma'at, and he would die the death which followed death, flung into the eternally wide maw of Amit, the devourer of shades. This was the cruelty and genius of the royal inquisitors, that the damned should oversee the salvation of the world. If Akenbet-neferu did not ascend among the gods, If the Serpent of Chaos was not slain once more, Sute would retake the Black Lands around the life spray of the sea, and would conquer all. Ra would fall down from the sky. Yamenu would disappear, forsaking his lesser children, and Ptah would no longer work his cosmic wheel, spinning out the deeds of men and God alike in his unity as Yamenu Ptah Re, the three who are one. For himself he now wished only oblivion, but he was a child of Kemet, and could not demand a universal nihility. Still, his heart wept at the thought of what would be done. The organs were to be exhumed from the temple of her body, all save the Iyeb, which lingered still at the centerpiece of her Aku, to light her way through the netherworld. The sacred spaces of her frame would be anointed with wines and spice, then the body would be consecrated with the desiccating salts. Left for 40 days, her arms would be gently folded to bear the scepters of might, and then after another 40, she would be wrapped in linen with jeweled starfish, ankhs, and sacred writings woven into the manifold shroud. Beside her canopic jar, with the sons of the owl god Heru presiding over, her body would be ready to return to glory in the Valley of the Kings. She would be taken to the place of her ancestors, resting in the sarcophagus with a chorus of mourners, bare-breasted, weeping, and howling to the gods. Her mouth would be open with the promise of new life. One blade of obsidian would begin the bid for eternity, obsidian retrieved from the glassy slopes of Sobek's angry mountain, where the demon god coiled and stirred, weeping fire into the sea, poisoning a sky upon which his eyes were forever too dim to gaze. The slitter would make the first incision through which the vital organs would be liberated. It would be made with care, and then he would have to flee for his life. It is a sin to injure the body of a pharaoh. The other criminals, less criminal than he, would then begin to stone him, shouting curses as he ran. The cut would sever he from she in all eternity. Some nights, as they lay sleeping, he would gaze upon her splendor and pray with his heart to the great god Yamenu, pray that the future should be kind to them, and he, still by her side, would strangely long to be with her again, as if she were already distant and now gone. The Ibu, tent of purification, was erected beside her pyramid near the long setting of the sun. It all had come to pass as he had seen it, but when the blade had bitten flesh and fallen back again, when the polished dolomite was cast upon his body to break him for his blasphemy, he fled and did not stop for death. The long night was laying its weary head upon the pyramids to sleep. The snow was clinging to the bases of the obelisks. Everything was still and resignation, save only for the blowing snow knifing at his eyes, the setting disk of light, and Kamenwati running through the plains. He ran from the setting sun, as if he thought to catch the stalwart bark of Ra on its way through the underworld and bring it back into the brink of day. The inversion of the pyramids upon the snowy plain was intended to mirror the passing of the stars, the negative brilliance of the obsidian tomes mimicking the sky lit night, while the endless white of the plains could lighten the heavens, making day seem night and night seem day. At the eastward entrance to the valley was the ancient Harmonakat Sphinx, with the scaly wings of an Exilian fish and the body of a lynx. The head itself was ageless as the one whose visage bore it through the tangled path of time, for the marble face it wore was his Tamari's. The monument watched him set into the deadlands of the east, and wept not for his passing there. Thrust into the eternity of death, life cannot face it as an equal, though it always wishes to, and will never cease to try.